And that's a harlequin duck, Histrionicus histrionicus, bringing us in. These birds travel in monogamous pairs, which means they stick together, ride or die, and they can be observed diving and collecting for food both in freshwater and saltwater habitats. And the males look pretty cool, if I do say so myself. Welcome to the Dissectify podcast, the show that gets you curious about the wild world right outside your window. I'm your host, Nicholas Sines, bringing you content far too late every Tuesday night. This episode, we're starting with a biota beat. So we're talking about the North American raccoons, or Procyon lotor. Also known as trash pandas. They're changing. They're still weird little fox creatures with monkey hands, to be sure. That much is still true. But there's been a terrible new development. They're becoming cuter, smarter, and friendlier towards humans. That still doesn't mean that you should try to befriend a raccoon. They're still wild animals, at least for now. Although maybe if they become friendly enough, we can look forward to some designer variations, some artificial selection. It won't be long until raccoons will have designer raccoons with different body dimensions and colorations. Maybe even a professional show or society that can uphold the standards of what a proper breed of raccoon should look like and behave. But we aren't there yet. Soon it may be time to open a raccoon pet toys brand. Maybe if that's been your ambition, your time's coming. Throughout many different mammal species, there's been a pattern that emerges when a species starts to become a more domesticated species, meaning it starts to depend on people for its survival. So cats, foxes, and dogs had met the same fate. And this meant shortening of the snout and rounding of the face and just generally keeping the features that a baby animal in that species would have had. Just those features stay longer into adulthood. So a study done by the University of Arkansas at Little Rock noticed thousands of observations of pictures of people like you and me going and finding these animals, is that their dimensions are starting to change. It's becoming more noticeable that in North American raccoons, their snouts are starting to shorten and reduce in size. This has been over many, many observations that we're starting to see these traits pop through for domesticated animals. Humans aren't making these changes, to be sure, right? We're not doing this on purpose. That would be artificial selection. So, think dog breeds, right? That would be an artificial selection thing. We want a dog with this trait. We're going to breed it with this dog to try to maintain that trait. We want a dog with curly hair. We want a dog with floppier ears. We want a dog that has a better sense of smell, right? Making that conscious choice and then breeding for that, artificial selection. But part of where that name, right, trash panda, or that sort of idea comes from, this has been a long-running thing where raccoons have been getting into our trash, right? They've had a reason to get closer to us because we have so much food laying around. So that has implications. And so we're not making these changes on purpose. So in that way, it's not natural selection and it's not artificial selection. So maybe it's unnatural selection. It's through us, but it's not done on purpose. Right, but this is a continuation of a long line of species that is doing their best to try to fit into a world dominated by humans. And part of where that unnatural selection comes in is where being more tolerant of human presence and the corresponding noise and all of our activity that, the things we do can pose a barrier to some species. But if a prospective raccoon can handle all this noise, can handle human activity, they can eat all of the leftovers that we just throw out. It means thousands of free calories that would have been very hard to find, in a woodland habitat. The calories are there, they're just nowhere near as concentrated as what we've done, right? There isn't McDonald's just sitting in a bag in the trash. In fact, even some of the measures that we take to prevent animals from getting into our trash may be a selective force, where animals that are the most comfortable around us are there, but then also those individuals that are able to solve the puzzles, like we make trash cans more complicated, add locking mechanisms or whatever, if they're comfortable enough to be around, they're more likely to get the food. So then we make it harder to get into our trash cans. Well, they're already comfortable to be around us, so they're going to sit there and try to figure out how to open the trash can. And that's part of it. They've been figuring it out. They're comfortable around us, and they're figuring out the problems that we try to put in their way to prevent this from happening. So this mirrors the other aspects of the environment that people inadvertently create. This mirrors the other aspects of the environment that people inadvertently create. So, for instance, cats were there because rodents are attracted to our trash. So then cats have rodents to hunt. And dogs were there to help us hunt and protect our living spaces in exchange for some leftovers. So they benefited, they stuck, they got domesticated. Our ability to find calories, create calories that will last us longer than any normal meal, right? They're more shelf stable. We want our food to last. We've done a really good job of finding calories and making sure they stay edible. And that means that we just have a lot of food lying around. And all it takes to gain access to the food is to be able to tolerate our presence. If they continue down the same strategy, possibly even becoming useful or cute to humans, which is a valid strategy, you might even get some food directly thrown to you. And that's just not going to happen if you're a big scary predator or extra flighty or aggressive or anything like that. And to the organism, this is like winning the lottery. As far as a wild animal is concerned, food is often the bottleneck for an individual's survival, and we have plenty of it. This is sort of in contrast to like throwing our food to wild animals. Doesn't necessarily lead to domestication, right? If you're feeding a bear, or feeding bears or something like that, it doesn't necessarily lead to domestication. But usually it just leads to a problem animal that might still be aggressive or fear people too much, but then also is now dependent on people to get its food. So it'll just become a problem. Which is usually why people say, don't feed the wild animals, because it's not good for them. Well, not only is it not healthy, but also it can lead to some bad encounters. Raccoons are the latest on the long list of species that are having to adapt to a world dominated by human habitat. Species that can tolerate proximity to humans, human activity, and the associated noise might be able to find some serious survival benefits. Even those species that aren't finding extra resources are still having to adapt to change that humans bring. For instance, frogs use vocals to advertise to rivals and potential mates. With increased human noise pollution, many frog species have started to alter their pitch in order to be more audible over human-created noise. Right? So they've had to change how they're making their calls in order to be heard by rivals, in order to let the female frogs know that, hey, I'm here, this is my space. Otherwise, it leads to rivals showing up unexpectedly, and it shows up in less mating, less offspring, if you're not heard by potential mates. And there are several other examples of animals adjusting to humans. Elephant populations have been changing so that individuals without tusks are more likely to survive simply because they won't be the target of poaching. They don't have the valuable tusks that poachers want to come in, shoot them, cut the tusks, and leave. Why would they come in and shoot an elephant and risk themselves when there's not even anything that would financially gain from? Even though for the elephants, this means that they're going to have a harder time digging for some food, they're going to have a harder time digging for some minerals, and also digging for water in their habitat. Although it has the short-term gain of negating poaching, but it's made this a genetic advantage, at least in the short term. Found in the oceans off the Indo-Pacific near Australia, the turtle-headed sea snake Emidocephalus annulatus is a species of snake that is very particular in its diet. It uses a special scale on the tip of its nose to scrape the fish eggs off of rocks and reefs underwater in order to eat. And this species the population of this species here is starting to see an interesting change. People have noticed that they're becoming darker in response to industrial water pollution. This is a little bit more interesting, I think, and more indirect than the elephant example. When I first heard about this, I thought it was going to be because they were harder to spot in like darker polluted waters, but no, it's even cooler than that. Tragic, but still cool. Darker means over time, the dark individuals have been able to cope better in the new environment. And scientists found that darker snakes were darker because they had more melanin in their cells. And these are on the surface skin cells. Scientists found that this melanin is better at binding to toxic substances found in the water. And when the snake goes to shed its skin, the collected toxic substances were concentrated in the skin are then removed and fall away with the skin. So this is one of those ways that, well, I'll let him say it.
I'm simply saying that life finds a way.
Yeah, life finds a way. And it's this really cool example of you're not really sure how things are going to react, right? In fact, we don't even know what is a problem for these species in how we're changing the environment. Which is fair. It's complicated, right? But the fact that we want to get from A to B, right? We put up a highway, we invent cars, we do all these genius inventions and set up the systems and do our thing, and then we figure out that what we're doing is a problem. A lot of these systems, even though life finds a way and things are adaptable, we just don't know how important or how fragile some of these systems are, right? Who would have known that, the tires on the highway or the engines that we've made in order to just get around, or the air conditioning unit nearby is whatever we've created, the ingenious inventions that people have created are an issue for species like frogs that are just trying to do what they've done for hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of years. I should have looked into it. I don't know how long. But they've been doing the same thing for a very long time, right? They make noise in order to cue up their fellow members of their species in order to say, hey, this is my territory, get away, or hey, females, I'm healthy and I want to mate, right? This is some of the communication that's been going on. It's been going on for a long time. And just by us doing what we need to do in order to get around or want to do in order to make our lives easier, we've trampled this communication setup that's been working for a very long time. Yeah, it's hard, right? Because I think all of these have examples of the intention is not to harm other species. But it seems like even the small things that we try to do might have impacts on species that are, frankly, kind of hard to avoid. Who would have thought? Who would have thought that making noise would have been such an issue for some species? I don't think it's going to make them go extinct, but it's definitely made them have to change. Whether it's noise pollution or actual pollution, like in the case of the sea snake, they're having to change. Turns out when there's runoff into waters, there can be an exposure and then things have to adapt. They're just going to keep doing what they need to do to survive, and frankly, they're not capable probably of, I think animals, right, they're just not there. They're not capable of thinking, even though they could probably move or change. They're not aware enough to do that, and also they're probably they're too adapted to the environment that they're used to. we change something even accidentally and they're going to have to adapt, and some individuals in that species may not be able to adapt. And that's led to change, right? Some individuals aren't making it because we've changed it too much for them to be able to continue on how they normally do. A lot of people don't support poaching, but there's a market for it, right? Somebody wants, for whatever reason, to have a piece of an elephant tusk because it's a status symbol. It makes them feel good, look good. They've earned money and they want to spend it this way. And I think a lot of people don't agree with, using that material or having it sourced, or think it's worth the repercussions of killing these large animals just to have their tusks. It's still a very human thing to try to collect things that raise our status but don't necessarily help us survive. But that's all I got for today, so thanks. Appreciate your time. I'll put some sources for a lot of the stuff I talked about in the description for the YouTube video. We have some more exciting stuff coming up. I'm going to be starting to try to produce some stuff that's not just these podcasts. So if you're listening and you've been interested, keep an eye out for that. But please leave a review wherever you're listening. Visit dissectify.com for more nature exploring tools. My Instagram at nicholas.signs can also be found there. Tag me in your nature photos. I'd love to see them. And remember, you live in a world with so many other species, so get out there and check it out.